Hello everyone, we are from Group 3. Today, our group is so pleased to conduct a video presentation which is focused on Chapter 9, Evaluating Inference, Assumption and other relevant arguments. Here is the content for our today presentation. There are 5 main points to be covered. The first one is implicit assumption. The second one is assuming if the reasons are true, the conclusion is. The third one is other relevant consideration. The fourth one overall argument evaluation and presenting a well-argued case. Last but not least, summary. Before jump into the detail, let me briefly talk about the introduction. As we have already known, when evaluating argument or explanation, we have to decide whether the reasons are acceptable or whether the inference are justified. In real argument, there are two important points we need to consider. The first is that there are assumptions lying in the background which may be relevant to what is being argued and which may need to be elicited if we are to have a full view of the argument. Second is that there are often different, perhaps opposing considerations from those which has been presented by the author and which need to be taken into account if one is to evaluate the arguments carefully. Before getting to implicit assumption, let's take a look at this example. If the world climate is getting warmer, we should find that some of the ice at the pole is melting at an unusual high rate. If the ice is melting, we should see its effect in the rising of the sea level of the sea. There is the evidence that the sea level is increasing, so the world climate must be warmer. After seeing this example, we can assume that sea level is increasing because the ice at the pole is melting at an unusual high rate due to the climate is getting warmer. And this example shows how implicit assumption works. So implicit assumption by definition refer to something people accept as true with a strong evidence and inference or sufficient proof. However, it's not easy to tell what is being assumed. So how to make it easy to tell what is being assumed? To make it easier, we should proceed to elicit assumption, especially when we are concerned about the quality of the inference. And those assumptions are, the first one is, seems likely in the context. As we can see in the example above, we assume something with specific evidence. The second one is make sense of what is said. We can make sense of what is said by the quality of inference, or we can say our inference should be justified. Last but not least, it seems necessary to make the reasoning as strong as possible. So here, our reason should be acceptable.
9.2 Assuming if the reason is true, the conclusion is. Before leaving assumption and how they affect inference, we should note that one strategy for attributing assumption to argument is less helpful than you might think. Let's take a look at this example. Some people have solved their own unemployment problem by great ingenuity in searching for a job or by willingness to work for less, so all the unemployed could do this. It is clear that you could add the assumption if some people have solved their own unemployment problem by great ingenuity in searching for a job or by willingness to work or less, then all the unemployed could do this. So now move on to deductive reasoning. Deductive reasoning is where you start from things you assume to be true and draw a conclusion that must be true if your assumption is true. To summarize the point, any inference, however illogical, can be converted into a deductive valid one just by adding the hypothetical assumption. If the reasons are true, so is the conclusion, but it does not strengthen the argument. For example, elephants have cells in their body and all cells have DNA, therefore elephants have DNA.
Part 3 are the relevant considerations. Finding out what someone thinks is always really creative. So you have to be innovative or do research into their view. However, the idea of all the considerations that are relevant to an argument is definitely where critical thinking becomes very imaginative and creative about other possibility, alternative considerations, and other options and so on. It is not enough to find flaw in what others claim to be a good judge of the issue. You must focus your judgment on the best point you can make, and sometimes you need to think of other important factors than the one you have raised. Discuss the problem from various points of view, envision alternative scenario, and maybe find other relevant detail. In short, you must be very imaginative. Let's take a look at one example. Most prospective parents would prefer to have sons. So, if people can choose the sex of their child, it is likely that there will eventually be more males than females in the populations. This could produce a serious social problems. Therefore, we should prohibit the use of techniques which enable people to choose the sex of their children. Do you think this argument is persuasive enough? Can you think of other arguments that are relevant to the issue? Many people find this claim really good when they first hear it, but we will soon have a different view when we continue to analyze the other relevant considerations, so to speak, think outside the box. Now, let's have a look at the same example but from another perspective. If prospective parents can choose the sex of their child, this may reduce the tendency in some society to go on having children until parents have the sons or daughter they desire. This could reduce the number of unwanted children and might also reduce the rate of population growth and so on. Issues like this are not always straightforward. We must be creative if we wish to judge them correctly as to what they think and what other factors are relevant and make decisions on this basis. Therefore, if you were asked to respond to an argument like this, you need to first have a clear picture of what it means, and then you can answer the underlying reason for it, discussing it or supporting those reasons, and then ask yourself how well they support their conclusions.
9.4 Overall argument evaluations and presenting a well-argued case. In this part, I'm going to explain you how to evaluate argument and how to present a well-argued and constructed case. To recap a bit, we have aware of some characteristic ways in which we reason poorly, and that includes logical fallacy and assumption. We have already learned some of the logical fallacy from our course so far. They are ad hominem, appeal to emotion, bandwagon, appeal to tradition, hasty generalization, straw man, false dilemma, slippery slope, and appeal to authority. Additionally, assumption is also the main component of why we have poor reasoning. It could be resulted from having an implicit assumptions or coming to the conclusion that if the reasons are true, the conclusion must be true. Therefore, we have also learned some basic thinking that help prevent us from having poor reasoning and to identify false claims. The basic thinking map includes analysis and evaluation. There are 4 questions we should be asking ourselves when we analyze a contact or claim. Question number 1. What is or are the main conclusions? These may be stated or unstated and may be recommendations, explanations, and so on. Conclusion indicator words and the therefore test may help. Question number 2. What are the reasons, data, evidence, and their structure? Question number 3. What is assumed, perhaps, in the context? Question number 4. Clarify the meaning of terms and claims that are unclear. And there are more questions we should be asking ourselves during our evaluation. Question number 5. Are the reasons acceptable? These include explicit reasons and unstated assumptions, and these may involve evaluating factual claim, definitions, and value judgment, and judging the credibility of a source. Question number 6. A. Does the reasoning support its conclusion? Is the support strong, for example, beyond reasonable doubt, or weak? B. Are there other relevant considerations, arguments, which threaten or weaken the case? You may already know these or may have to construct them. Question number 7. What is your overall evaluation on a scale from 1 to 6? Using this basic thinking map and understanding the previous concept, we are now able to look at the arguments and write much better argued responses to them, because we know what question to ask and how to answer them. Hence, we are now ready to evaluate claims and present a well-argued case to help us identifying the structure of an argument. With regard to this, 2 examples will be raised and used to explain how an argument should be understood.
In order to understand it better, let's take a quick dive into a real-life example. In this instance, let's take a look at the case of joyriding, a situation where a person or more tries to steal a car to ride in just for the thrill of doing so. There have been arguments thrown around whether the policy of chasing after joyriders is a must or whether it is a no-no. On one end, people may argue that, well, who's going to teach those joyriders a lesson then? But on the other, they might say, no stolen car is worth a human life. But for the time being, we are only going to discuss and evaluate the argument of the pro-ban the chase people. Before we evaluate the argument though, here are a few things that we should take into consideration. One is what the argument is about, the reasoning behind the argument, and the assumptions that the argument has. And 2 is to ask the right questions regarding the topic and the argument. After you've had all those bullet points synced in, let's dissect what they had to say about the argument. Here is a direct quotation of the argument. The police force should ban the officers from driving at high speed in pursuit of young joyriders who steal cars. Many deaths of both joyriders and both bystanders have occurred as a result of such chases. The police say that they have policies which are aimed at preventing danger in public by requiring the police drivers to abandon the chase when the speed becomes too high for safety. But the excitement of the chase inevitably makes the police drivers forget about the policy and disregard the public safety. And again, if you haven't quite got the memo, no stolen car is worth a human life. Now, we can obviously tell that the point here is that they want to ban the police chase altogether. And their reason for doing so is that the process can cost both joyriders and innocent people's lives. Then they proceeded to assume that police may get caught up with all the adrenaline of the chase and forget about the safety of the public. But what are the right questions to ask in regards to this argument? After dissecting what they had claimed, we can easily respond with 3 questions. The first being that what should be done to those joyriders? If we had the police chase them, they would get scared and drive recklessly. Even if we didn't have the police chase them, they would still drive recklessly for thrill. Either way, chaos still ensues. Another question is that, can we blame the police though? In the argument, they stated that the rush of the pursuit makes the police forget about the policy and disregard the safety of the public. But in the defense of the police, in dangerous situations like this, where they have to make swift decisions, mistakes are inevitable. If we want to blame the police, shouldn't we also be blaming the doctors who have failed to save the lives of others as well? The final question is that whether there are any other alternative, such as safer cars, helicopter chase, or an implementation of spiked mats on the path of the stolen cars. Alternatives like these should also come into consideration and should be tested on whether they can prove to have a better effect than the policy that we have right now.
So on here are some evidence and examples in the literature that we have learned. And today the story that I'm going to illustrate to you guys is Romeo and Juliet. In part A of the story, the horrifying news of Juliet's death reached Balthazar while he was strolling in the street. Knowing nothing about the plan, he quickly went to inform Romeo. After Romeo heard the shocking news, he made a hasty arrangement to return to Verona that night in order to see Juliet for the last time. However, everything didn't go smoothly as he think. He encountered Count Paris, who has been deeply in love with Juliet. When Paris saw Romeo, he made a harsh assumption that, as a bitter enmity between Montague and Capulet, Romeo might have come to the wall to violate Tybalt and Juliet's body. And this led to a life-death fighting between the two men, in which Paris was killed. So, if we take a look at Perry's assumption, are the reasons acceptable? He just saw Romeo without asking for a reason or listening to Romeo's explanation. He started duel with him, and at the end of the story, he just died for nothing. So the reasons are not really acceptable. And another question asks that, if you were Paris, would you do the same? I think some of you might say yes and some of you might say no. If you say yes, you might follow the author's intention, because at that time Paris was devastated due to Juliet's death. So he couldn't think of anything. That is why he did it that way. However, should it be another way to deal with this argument? And if so, would it end differently? Imagine if we try to think out of the box, or in another way, Paris should restrain himself and try to understand the reason why Romeo was visiting the vault, and everything would be end up in a better way. He would have a happy life with another woman and without die for nothing. So we can conclude that in order to judge inference skillfully, we need to ask, does the reason support its conclusion? And are there relevant consideration or argument in which strengthen or weaken the case?
Now it comes to the end of our presentation. You have learned how to evaluate inferences. To sum up evaluating inferences, first, you need to make assumptions but you think they make sense to you, and reasonable by finding the facts instead of rating people. Second, you can find other points that are important to the claims or arguments. All about, you need to jot down possible ideas, choose the good ones, and well represent your thoughts. That's all for our presentation. Thanks for watching.